All right. Thank you, Balaji, for this really inspiring and very thought-provoking talk. And I guess we don't have that much time, but maybe if I just want to cover the very first question I have when you talk about the network state. In many ways, we do want to see the same thing when we talk about basically what's happening in the future. How do you deal with those that have a monopoly on violence?
Great
I
question.
mean,
Okay.
it's the enforcement of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody always asks this. And the thing about this is, um, when I wrote the first version of Never Stayed in 2022, I had a catch 22, which was if I didn't cover this, then, oh my God, Balaji, not you, but it was like, oh my God, Balaji, you're so naive. You don't understand hard power, right? And then if I had covered it in extreme detail, they'd say, this is a tech warlord. He's talking about the drones. It's right. So had a catch 22. So I chose the first path. Better be considered naive, right, than to have thought everything out in extreme detail. Okay. So my short version is contract with existing states. And the reason is, think about crypto, right? Crypto did not just go to sovereignty right away. It just started with basically people saying, okay, enjoy your beanie babies or what have you over here and just pay tax revenue to the government. And then you kind of integrate with the monetary authorities and so on. And over time, it got enough traction that El Salvador made the national currency and start to level up and you start fusing with the state, right? And so that's essentially the short answer is the crypto playbook, where you're just doing your own little startup society on your own. And then eventually you have enough capital and money that you might be able to get an island, get a peninsula, get some deserted piece of land like what Burning Man is. And then you, through the law, you say, hey, this is an unincorporated region. Let me incorporate it, which exists as a process for that in many countries. Or you pass a bill. And crucially, you do this in parallel with hundreds of governments, or whether you say hundreds, there's almost 200 sovereigns, but there's hundreds of city governments, state governments around the world. And so you're parallel processing, it's no one government that you're depending on, similar to how Amazon did HQ2, for example. So short answer is minimum necessary. I mean, think about crypto. We didn't have to fire a shot to get Bitcoin to $1 trillion, right?
So does that mean sort of more a kind of a slow usurping of the sort of national states?
I wouldn't use usurping. I'd say symbiotic,
Symbiotic.
right? Because here's why. If you think about crypto, right? At first, people said, oh, they're going to immediately ban crypto with harsh penalties and so on and so forth. And no doubt, some countries try to do that. But what was the flip side? Countries like, the UAE, Panama, like others, welcome crypto. Why? Because they're poor, small countries, or not, but the UAE isn't poor, but they're small countries, or they're poor, or both, and they're sovereigns. And they welcome the economic development because what does crypto bring? It brings technology, it brings investment. These are rare things in the world for most people, right? So in the same way, something like this Startup Society brings the remote workers in person. It brings high tech. That's a scarce resource for lots of places around the world. So they say, okay, great, knock yourself out, get a tech island. The other piece of it is there's dual citizens in a sense. What do I mean by that? There's like a Bitcoin American, right? There's like an Ethereum German, right? They are citizens of both cloud and land, right? Similar to how you might say somebody's a Catholic American, right? Catholicism isn't a place, but there are Catholic places, right? The internet isn't a place, but there are internet places. This is now an internet place. That's an important concept. Go ahead.
No, great. Thank you. I mean, I guess in some ways you could say that in a way that smaller countries, it's a way for them to get more power, if there's more influence. And I think it's the dynamism of power and the dynamics of power that's actually we're seeing play out right now. So you have these, I mean, actually you wrote about this as well, which is that you have these different areas of power. I guess, crypto capital, which is a form of power. I guess the network state power, which is emerging. But then you also have, I guess the current forms of power. And then I guess the one question I have is like those who want to protect that, say places like China, for instance, how do you think they will sort of interact with the network state? Because it is very much about sort of, I guess, the perspectives on who holds power, and in this case, might even be threatening for certain states.
Okay, so several things there. So first is I do think the future. I think there's two. I think the American Empire is ending. It was real and it was spectacular, but it's over. And I think the heirs to American Empire are China and the internet. China is a land, the internet is a cloud. China is a billion-person scientific superstate, like Apple. It's like fully vertically integrated, right? The Han Chinese nation, the Chinese party state, and then also the Great Firewall and all the apps, the network. Nation state and network are like vertically integrated like Apple. And 99%-ish of Chinese speakers and the Chinese people of Chinese ethnicity are there. Obviously, there's Taiwan, there's Singapore, there's a Chinese diaspora, but like the vast majority are within this sort of vertically integrated stack. And then the other side is the internet, which is like Android, right? That is chaotic, it's anarchic, it's it's free, right? Go ahead.
No, 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 go. I'm just smiling. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Right. So China versus the internet is like Apple versus Android. I think that's a very good way of thinking about what the future of the world is, right? And of course, Android is a pretty good, thing out there. For many people, it's actually pretty decent, right? And it has really bright spots. And in particular, crypto could deploy on Android and so on and so forth. And I think that the reason I think this is America doesn't have the economic scale comparable to China. People don't get this yet. They'll get this. But the internet is the one thing that has economic scale comparable to China, right? And people discount the internet. When I say this, they're like, "Oh, Balaji, you don't understand hard power," right? I'm like, actually, I understand hard power very well. China has 200x the shipbuilding capacity of the U.S. It has 10x the steel. China has a hard power. America doesn't. This is what people don't understand. Hegseth understands. It's the U.S. Defense Secretary. He said China's hypersonic can sink all U.S. aircraft carriers in 20 minutes. The former U.S. Secretary of the Navy admitted one Chinese shipyard can make more ships than the entire U.S. Navy combined, right? China is the world's largest Navy in the world, by the way. They just went vertical on that. They're number one in cars. With Comac, they're going to become number one in planes. There's basically every single industry you can imagine. You can't fight your factory, right? So against something like that, you have to recalibrate and say, where is hard power? Hard power is in China, but hard money is in Bitcoin, right? And so that's actually the two poles in my view, right? Because Chinese people do respect Bitcoin. They want VPNs to get to the free internet, right? And so you just can't physically coerce China. This entire American model of thinking, I think, is just going to be like just shown to be incorrect, right? However, and to your point, by the way, about power, I would say money persuades, power compels, right? So the internet persuades. It's digital, it's intangible, right? It's global, it's flexible. And whereas power compels, that's software, that's hard power, right? So the China Russia kind of stack is like the state, and we are the network, right? And of course, there's things in the middle, like the network state, right? So there's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? And there's going to be people who are all the way on the network side. And I think, for example, just since you got me on this topic, I think after Democrats, communists, that is to say, many people in blue America, I predicted this a long time ago, and it's happening now. They basically want to fold into the most powerful state, and so they are starting to say, okay, well, China has a lot going for it. So Iglesias and Noah Smith and a bunch of people start posting on this kind of thing. Nick Dent and other people post on this. And I think after MAGA maximalism, okay, so that's to say, after to put in a one-liner, after Orange Man, Orange Coin. Okay. So essentially what's going to happen is if like what is going about happens and Bitcoin moons, right? And the US economy, like all of the America First stuff doesn't work, and the tariffs cause shortages and maybe capital controls and all kinds of nasty things in the US, which I think is very, very possible to happen. Then the one thing that still works is Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin is cross-border, and Bukele's a Bitcoiner, and there's Canadian Bitcoiners, and Bitcoin can build a cross-border coalition in a way that MAGA can't, right? So lots of people are going to become laser-eyed, I think, in the next few years, where basically Bitcoin is the only thing that survives in North America in some ways, right? That's bad. It's like there's lots of crazy things that happen because I don't like crypto anarchy. I like crypto civilization. But I do think after Democrats, communists, after MAGA maximalists, right? And so that means, I think, like, what does it mean for this room? I think insofar as you're dependent on the US in any way, like I know you're doing more in the US or what have you, but like anybody who has like a US supply chain, for example, has just gotten wrecked, right? And that means importing or exporting because the retaliatory tariffs are coming. There's retaliatory tariffs that are likely coming on tech. If you've got tech based in the US, lots of countries, for example, Indonesia, even before this election, they're putting like $1 billion. They're asking Apple for $1 billion to sell iPhones in Indonesia, if you're aware of that. Every country has had things like data center laws for data locality. They've all resented the power of the US-based global tech companies. And now they've got an excuse to impose retaliatory tech tariffs, right? So the thing is that the US had two exports, which were the dollar and tech. Those are the things that were globally competitive. And what it's just done is it's blown up the dollar because countries don't want that anymore. And it's also going to blow up tech. So it's going to end up deindustrialized, de-dollarized, and de-technologized. And that's going to be like a huge disaster over the next several years. We're going to have to like essentially protect freedom on the other side. Let me pause there.
No, I guess this is like a different version of the bunker story, right? Like everyone's saying you need to go get a bunker somewhere in Africa because of World War III, but actually we are talking about a totally different type of sort of emergency state, as it were.
Yeah, well, so here's what I say. The thing is, we've lived through this. The collapse of the Soviet Union was like this, right? It really sucked. Anybody here who's from the former Soviet bloc, like essentially what Trump is doing with the tariffs is similar to what Yegor Gaider did in early 1992. So you can make a rough analogy. The Soviet Union ended after both internal nationalism
and internal economic strains. Everybody talks about the economic strains. That's a big deal, no question. But both non-Russians felt Russians were oppressing them, and Russians felt non-Russians were oppressing them. So the whole thing like burst apart. So there's a nationalist and ethnic dimension to it as well. And the US has both of these things, right? It has the Keynesianism, which is very similar to communism, where it's central planning, and it also has the internal ethnic tensions. So what kind of the 2024 election can be conceptualized to late 1991, where the Soviet Union fell apart, and then everybody thought they were going into a sunny uplands. And Yerger Geider in 1992 did something called shock therapy, right? He just tried overnight to say market economy, and it just wrecked the Russian ruble, and the ruble hyperinflated, and everybody was bust and so on. I think that's similar to what Trump is doing with the tariffs. History is kind of repeating, but basically what it means is the more dependent you are on the U.S. in any way, the more you're going to get wrecked. So like, only invest in the U.S. dollar what you can afford to lose, right? If you to the Bitcoin one-liner, right? And the reason for that is Trump has actually said that he's going to default, or he might default on the debt, right? Mark Carney, who's the potentially the new head of Canada, he ran the Bank of England. There's all this stuff Trump was calling them the 51st state and so on and so forth. And then Mark Carney said one thing to him, and actually Trump actually became nicer. Do you know what he said? He said Canada's going to sell all U.S. bonds. Okay, Carney actually just gave a videotaped interview on this, right? And so, like,
kind of what people are saying about China, right?
Yes. So the problem, I mean, this is not chess. Starting a fight with every single country in the world at once by imposing tariffs on everybody at once and saying you're trying to get China. It's like a gang member firing into a crowd and being like, I'm trying to get that guy, right? And so what it's just done is it's given the other 190 countries, unfortunately, an incentive to just completely relocalize around China. The problem is if we got more woke than we wanted and we got more MAGA than we wanted, we're going to get more China than we wanted, right? Like most people cannot keep two things in their head, that China is actually extremely competent and also that China is ruthlessly self-interested, and they will do what's in their national interest, which may not be in one's own national interest, right? And that includes many Chinese people who are locked down by the Shanghai lockdowns and so on. So freedom needs a constituency, and that's really what the people in this room are about.
So maybe to end it with slightly a few more hopeful notes.
Yes, that's a good call. Yes, go. Yeah, sure.
Right. So one of the sort of really powerful things that America had, and still has, I would argue, is soft power. But in that soft power, I would argue, is actually more powerful than the hard power because it influenced people's culture. Like one of the biggest nightmares, one of the reasons why media often was sort of in some ways censored in places around the world is because the conceptions of American movies, they talk about freedom and individual rights and democracy, actually were somewhat destabilizing. And the youth grows up with these ideas and they say, you know what, I want freedom, whatever that may mean, because of different constructions around. And then they take that back. But there are certainly, and then you obviously cause some destabilizations. But more importantly, there's certainly universal truths. I mean, I certainly believe that as humans we want, that generally we're mostly altruistic. We're selfish too, but on balance, right? We're not super crazy selfish. We only care about basically sort of taking advantage of others. Those would be typically called psychopath, right? So there's classifications between that. And so what do you think are these universal values that perhaps we can then build around this new network state and this new network future to basically build a better future? Excellent question. And that's why I'm internet first, right? Because freedom is internet freedom. Equality is internet equality. All the attributes, one way to think that is internet's version 3.0, right? You go from the common law of Britain to the Constitution of America, the smart contracts of the internet, right? And so what is the internet? It is binding contracts. So it can't just be annulled by by a judge or a president. It's like binding contracts. It is everybody's a first-class citizens of the internet, right? It's a peer-to-peer network. And what we've done is we've basically developed law for the internet, right? And that law is consensual and opt-in, and you can hedge between them. So you can have the Solana legal system, the Ethereum legal system, the Bitcoin legal system. You can set legal systems, and those legal systems can bind in ways that are novel and interesting and completely non-violently and completely consensually. And it's skin of the game, and you may get wrecked, and so that's all virtualized, so no one's getting really hurt this way, right? So I think freedom is internet freedom, equality is internet equality, and that's actually what carries the torch, because America doesn't want to stand for that anymore, right? They're tired of the empire, they're tired of doing that, they're retiring from the world, but the internet is rising. I think it will be a trend center, but it will also be an internet century.
Well, thank you very much. I would say one thing I would want to add is, with blockchain, one of the powerful things about this is that the rules are known. Everyone knows what they are. And I think the foundations of our freedoms come from one other aspect, which is that the rules of the game, right? The legal system had a certain type of framework that ensured that, if you did the right thing, you were free to do certain things. And these rules were obviously done in law through government,
and now these rules exist on chain through code. And I think that's a future that you speak of, and the future in which we can have actually perpetual freedom through the network state. That's right. Thank you so much.